Between 1554 and 1558, the kingdoms of Spain and England were more than allies. Following the marriage of Philip II of Spain and Mary Tudor, they were bedfellows against their common enemy, the Kingdom of France. Following the death of Mary on the 17th of November 1558, her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth ascended to the throne, which led to a gradual simmering of tensions. The simmer came to a boil in the year 1588, when a fleet of nearly 200 ships, inflamed by holy Catholic zeal, pointed their prows at England's heretical shores. In this video, we will explore one of naval history's greatest David and Goliath stories, and explore how the English repulsed the largest invasion force ever assembled against their island nation. And the naval action doesn't stop there, because we've got good news from our sponsor, World of Warships Legends, the explosive and tactical PvP naval combat game for consoles. Grab a wide selection of warships from the modern era and go head-to-head in team battles on the high seas. Mixing fast-paced shooting with careful use of naval tactics, it's the blazing action of FPS and the deadly guile of strategy combined into one epic gameplay experience. It's easy to learn, with a depth of upgrades and content being added all the time, and especially made for the big screen experience on PlayStation 4 and 5 and Xbox Series X, S and 1. And by the way, it's free. The big news is their Black Friday update is now here, bringing you a whole load of discounts and unique goodies in the store, making it the ideal time to turn the tide with useful and powerful items. But most importantly, you can now commission a new line of black painted ships. If you want to pilot the Tier 5 Dunkirk, Tier 6 Asashio, Tier 7 Tirpitz, or legendary Napoli, you can grab these shadowy seaborne stalkers for a limited time right now. You can also claim a special bundle with coupons for extra doubloons when you make a purchase. The sale is on right now, and more special events in the period are coming, so dive into the action now for free. All the info you need will be at the link in the description. Throughout the 1560s, the relationship between England and Spain had become increasingly strained. Religiously, the two countries had been at odds, ever since Henry VIII had told the Pope to shove off so he could dump his wife. Consequently, Philip covertly supported plots to restore the Catholic Church's supremacy in England, and ordered the capture of English trading ships in the Americas. On the other hand, Elizabeth encouraged the actions of privateers, such as Francis Drake, against Spanish trading routes in the Atlantic. The major flashpoint in this 16th century Cold War was the province of Flanders, under Spanish control. In 1572, Protestant Dutch rebels supported by England scaled up their uprising against Spain. In 1578, Philip's nephew, Alessandro Farnese, Duke of Parma, was able to contain the insurgency. But Parma soon realized that the only way to re-establish lasting control was to cut off English support from the rebels. Tensions continued to mount in 1580. When Philip demanded that Francis Drake be punished for his piratical actions against Spanish shipping, Elizabeth responded by knighting him. In the same year, a contingent of Spanish and papal volunteers staged a landing at Smerwick in Ireland to support an Irish uprising. The volunteers were defeated, but the action took England and Spain one step closer to open war. The two naval powers came directly to blows on the 26th of July 1582 at the Battle of Villafranca de Campo, part of the War of the Portuguese Succession. After annexing Portugal, Philip of Spain had to contend with a Portuguese pretender, Antonio, Prior of Crato, supported by English and French forces. At Villafranca de Campo, the Spanish fleet routed Antonio's fleet, including his English allies. This victory emboldened Philip, prompting him to contemplate a decisive action against England. The king asked his most senior admiral, Don Alvaro de Bazan, Marquis of Santa Cruz, to devise a plan for an invasion. In 1585, Parma scored a series of victories against the Dutch rebels, prompting Elizabeth to commit further support to the Hollanders' cause. According to the Treaty of Nonsuch, England would provide financial assistance and 7,000 troops to the rebel war effort. In the following year, Elizabeth's head of intelligence, Sir Francis Walsingham, uncovered yet another Catholic conspiracy, the Babington Plot. In retribution, Queen Elizabeth ordered the execution of Mary, the Catholic Queen of Scots, on February 18, 1587. This course of events prompted Philip to accelerate plans for the invasion, and his admiral Santa Cruz began assembling the mighty Great Armada in Lisbon. The plan was to sail towards the Dutch coast with 130 vessels and 19,000 troops. Santa Cruz was then to join up with Parma, who could contribute a force of 27,000 troops, 81 ships, and 194 barges. Only then the combined force would cross the English Channel, disembark between Margate and Dover, and march towards London. In Parma's estimates, the Spanish troops could conquer the capital within 8 days. However, Santa Cruz's plans were delayed by a daring action of Sir Francis Drake. On April 29, 1587, the privateer stormed the harbour of Cadiz, burning and sinking up to 27 ships. His raid was followed by a further 6 weeks of harassing expeditions along the Spanish and Portuguese coast, ensuring that the Armada would not sail off until the next year. This delay caused supplies in Lisbon to rot, while the assembled troops fell ill to infectious outbreaks. An anxious king had to postpone decisions even further when Santa Cruz died on February 9, 1588. Philip appointed Don Alonso Perez de Guzman, Duke of Medina Sidonia, as his successor. Medina Sidonia was a skilled administrator and general on land, but at sea he was completely out of his depth. He was aware of his shortcomings and wrote to Philip, "I have not health for the sea, for I know by the small experiences I have had afloat that I soon become seasick." Nonetheless, Medina Sidonia eventually accepted the role and revised the invasion plans with Philip. The forces of the Army of Flanders had dwindled to 18,000 men due to disease. Therefore, Parma was still confident that he could take London, but a full-on occupation of England may not have been possible any longer. In fact, Philip secretly organised Parma to offer a compromise deal, which included religious tolerance for Catholics in England in return for English non-interference in Flanders. Philip's orders for Medina Sidonia were more straightforward. He was to avoid any engagement with the English in the Channel. His main objective was to link up with Parma and escort his troops to Dover. This rendezvous was in itself a cause of great confusion. The Duke of Parma, from Brussels, could not easily communicate with Medina Sidonia in Lisbon. Hence, the Spanish admiral assumed Parma would sail out to meet him off the Dutch coast, while the Italian general knew that his small vessels could not break through the Anglo-Dutch blockade and expected the Armada to come and pick his army up on the coast. On May 10, 1588, the Great Armada sailed from the port of Lisbon and immediately came back. Contrary winds held back the fleet for 2 weeks, while provisions and morale dwindled. Favourable winds finally allowed Medina Sidonia to move out, and by June 17th, the Armada sighted Cape Finisterre. The admiral realised that most of his food and water supplies were spoiled, and therefore ordered his ships to wait off Finisterre for resupplies. Sudden gales dispersed the fleet over a wide area, forcing Medina Sidonia to make a stop at Corunna to wait for the stragglers. Some of his ships were blown as far as the Scilly Isles, which alerted the English that a large Spanish force was on its way. Lord Charles Howard, the English admiral, ordered a preemptive strike. On July 4th, 100 ships sailed from Plymouth to attack Corunna. But unfavourable winds from the south frustrated Howard's plan, and the English squadrons had to return to base. By July 23rd, Medina Sidonia had reassembled his vessels and resumed his voyage, but the elements were once again against him, as he lost 5 ships to a storm in the Bay of Biscay. On July 30th, the Armada came into sight of the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. A system of warning beacons alerted Lord Howard and his commanders in Plymouth. According to legend, the officers were playing bowls, and Sir Francis Drake commented, "We have time to finish the game and beat the Spaniards too." This episode is clearly apocryphal, but the English did wait until the next morning before moving out of Plymouth. The first engagement between the two fleets took place on July 31st, off Eddystone Rock. Medina Sidonia had laid out his ships in a crescent formation, known as Lunula, sailing eastwards. The rearguard was protected by 6 squadrons under his most trusted commanders. Lord Howard was able to sail his 85 ships to the back of the Lunula, which ensured the English had the weather gauge, or the advantage of the wind direction. English vessels were typically smaller and more maneuverable than their adversaries, boasting also better artillery pieces which could fire at a rate of 3 to 4 shots per hour. The larger Spanish ships could load more guns, but each could fire at a rate of only 1 shot per hour. The Spanish marine infantry, however, was superior in quantity and quality to the English. Thus, throughout their engagements, the Spanish sought to grapple and board enemy ships, while the English avoided contact at all costs, preferring to fire at a distance. Howard's initial attack was directed at the center of the Spanish formation, while Drake and his squadron attacked the northern end of the rearguard under Admiral Recalde, second in command for the Armada. Recalde's squadron veered back into the Lanula, leaving him and his own ship, the San Juan de Portugal, to fight Drake single-handedly. Medina Sidonia decided to intervene with his flagship, the San Martin, and 7 other galleons and galleasses. As the Spanish squadron intervened, Drake's forces kept at a distance to avoid being grappled. An artillery exchange continued indecisively until the afternoon, when Admiral Lord Howard ordered the English to pull back. Howard had not stopped the Armada, which continued its eastward voyage. Moreover, the English guns, fired from a long range, had dealt little damage to the Spanish. But Howard retained the weather gauge and continued to pursue the crescent-shaped invasion force along the channel. Unbeknownst to Medina Sidonia, his armada would sooner or later find itself squeezed between the pursuing Howard to the west and another fleet to the east, stationed in Dover under Admiral Seymour. Later in the afternoon, the Armada suffered 2 setbacks of note. At 4 PM, a gunpowder accident on the San Salvador caused a large explosion, killing over 200 crewmen. The ship also carried most of the Armada's crew's wages, a fact which dealt a heavy blow to morale. Later in the day, Medina Sidonia had to leave behind another crippled vessel, the Rosario, following an accidental collision. As darkness fell, Howard ordered for Drake and his Revenge to lead the English fleet, using his stern lantern as a guiding light. Around midnight, Drake's light suddenly went off. As a result, the English ships were scattered and had to wait until the first light of day to regroup and resume the pursuit of the Armada. It later emerged that Drake had turned off his lantern to chase a German merchantman and later to capture the stranded Rosario. Squadron commander and Drake's rival, Martin Frobisher, was not particularly happy. Like a coward, he kept by the Rosario all night because he would have the spoil. He thinketh to cozen us out of our share of 15,000 ducats, but we will have our shares, or I will make him spend the best blood in his belly. Martin Frobisher would be the protagonist of the next engagement, an action off the Isle of Portland on August the 2nd. A change in wind direction gave the Armada the weather gauge, prompting Medina Sidonia to disobey King Philip's directives and seek a clash with the English. As the Spanish rearguard approached the English vanguard, Howard attempted to slip past the Lanula, sailing close to the land. Medina Sidonia barred his way, and by 9 AM, the 2 fleets were exchanging fierce yet inconclusive broadsides. A squadron of 6 ships, led by Frobisher's Triumph, tried to outflank the Armada once again from the north. Medina Sidonia dispatched his 4 galleasses to deal with the privateer, but they ended up trapped in a tidal rip known as Portland Race and came under fire from Frobisher. At the same time, a squadron under Drake attacked the southern flank of the Armada, while Howard moved northwards to support Frobisher. Medina Sidonia's flagship, San Martin, intervened, gallantly challenging the English flagship, Ark Royal, and 7 other ships. Howard's squadron fired 500 shots against the San Martin, which responded with 80 of her own. Both sides dealt little damage, however, and when a battle group came in Medina Sidonia's support, Howard, Drake, and Frobisher disengaged and rejoined ranks. August the 3rd was marked by a short engagement in which Drake's Revenge tried to capture a stranded Spanish ship, but was foiled by the arrival of the galleasses. On the following day, Howard's sailors spotted 2 large stragglers near the Isle of Wight, the San Luis and the Santa Ana, prompting him to attack. It is unclear if these ships were genuine stragglers or bait left by Medina Sidonia as a ploy to occupy the Isle of Wight. As the Spanish admiral was yet to receive news from the Duke of Parma, he may have decided to invade the Isle as a secondary objective, previously authorized by Philip II. The San Luis and Santa Ana were attacked by a squadron under privateer John Hawkins. As the Spanish galleasses came to the rescue, Hawkins was reinforced by the Ark Royal and another galleon. Medina Sidonia's San Martin joined the fight, leading to a gunnery duel between the two flagships. Meanwhile, Frobisher tried his signature tactic of sailing close to the shore to outflank the Armada. But as the wind dropped, his Triumph became an easy target, taking serious damage from the Spanish. When the wind blew again, the Triumph sailed westwards to safety. After another artillery exchange on the southern flank, Medina Sidonia was ordered to disengage, worried about the dwindling supplies of shot and gunpowder. Howard too was running low on ammunition, but he could rely on supplies from the motherland. The Spanish admiral, on the other hand, was hoping for shipments from his ally in Flanders, the Duke of Parma, but there was still no news from him. On August 6th, the Armada reached the Straits of Dover. Here, the strong currents risked sweeping the Spanish ships into the North Sea before they could join Parma. Thus, at 4 p.m, Medina Sidonia ordered for his fleet to lay anchor at Calais Roads, 4 miles from Calais itself. Later in the afternoon, the Spanish sighted an English squadron approaching from the north. This was the unit stationed at Dover under Admiral Seymour, which brought the total English force to 140 ships. As Medina Sidonia dispatched another urgent message for Parma, an uneasy night fell over the Armada. The following day, the admiral received a response from his ally in Flanders, but it was not a reassuring one. The Duke had indeed prepared his fleet at Dunkirk, but the troops had not been embarked yet. This was likely due to the ambiguity generated by King Philip's orders. Parma awaited news of Medina Sidonia's approach before embarking his soldiers and braving the Anglo-Dutch blockade. Loading his troops onto the ships too early would have only contributed to exhausting supplies and spreading diseases. Nonetheless, now that they had made contact, the two forces could be united within the next 3 days. On the night between the 7th and the 8th, however, their plans were thwarted by a simple yet effective English tactic: hellburners, or fireships. These were vessels covered in combustible material, manned by a skeleton crew who would then set them on a collision course against an enemy fleet to break its cohesion. As 8 hellburners approached the anchorage of the Armada, the Spanish sprung into action, grappling 2 of them and towing them ashore. The strong winds, however, drove the remaining 6 straight into the bulk of the fleet. The Spanish sailors hastily cut the anchor's cables and set sail to the northeast. Medina Sidonia had lost only 3 ships in the incident due to collisions rather than fire. His plan was to regroup and return to Calais Roads to recover his ship's anchors. The strong currents, however, pushed the Armada further east and toward the sandy banks of Flanders. The flagship San Martin could lay anchor close to Gravelines, east of Calais, rallying around her a small force of 4 galleons. As the bulk of Howard's fleet attacked the Spanish flagship, his own squadron veered towards the French coast, pursuing the galleass of Captain Moncada, the San Lorenzo. The galleass ran aground, but the musketeers on board provided fierce resistance against the approaching English boarding ships, exacting heavy casualties. Only when an English shot killed Moncada did Spanish resistance crumble, and Howard's men seized the San Lorenzo. The governor of Calais sent some emissaries to notify the English that the loot of the San Lorenzo belonged to him. In response, English troops robbed the messengers, and the governor retaliated by firing the cannons from his fortress. The boarding parties withdrew with a loot of 20,000 ducats, but suffered more casualties than in the entire rest of the campaign. Meanwhile, the San Martin, by now assisted by 6 or 7 auxiliaries, was fending off an attack by up to 40 English ships. Among them was Drake's Revenge, which was hit more than 40 times. Frobisher's Triumph and Hawkins's squadron came to her aid, scoring a total of 107 hits on the San Martin. Finally, at about 10 a.m, the Spanish officers De Leyva, Recalde and Oquendo came to reinforce the lone flagship. When the tide of the battle seemed to turn to the Spanish side, Admiral Seymour struck from the north, breaking into the reforming Armada with formidable broadsides. Galleon San Felipe took the brunt of the shot, losing 200 of her crew. Her commander, Don Francisco de Toledo, tried to grapple the closest English ships, challenging his foes to hand-to-hand combat. As per their tried and tested tactics, the English avoided a direct confrontation, chased by cries of "Lutheran chickens!" These Lutheran chickens, whilst avoiding the enemy's grappling hooks, were able to approach at close enough range to deal enormous damage with their guns. The first ship to succumb was the San Mateo. Compromised beyond repair, the San Mateo was beached near Ostend, where a force of Dutch blockaders under Justin of Nassau massacred most of the crew. The San Felipe was the second loss of the day, as it also drifted ashore near Ostend. Finally, it was the turn of Maria Juan to go down with her crew of 275. At around 4 PM, both sides exhausted their ammunition and food supplies. Weather conditions suddenly worsened, and a heavy storm hampered visibility. Strong winds and currents pushed the Armada northeasterly and out of the English Channel, while Howard ordered for his ships to break off and regroup. By the end of the Battle of Gravelines, the Armada had lost 3 confirmed vessels, plus a small auxiliary ship. The Spanish had also suffered 1,000 dead and 800 wounded. The English losses, besides the battle for the San Lorenzo, were minimal. On a tactical level, the defeat inflicted on the Armada may have appeared far from decisive. On a strategic level, however, Lord Howard had achieved his aims. He had managed to push the Armada into the North Sea, thus preventing it from joining forces with Parma's Army of Flanders. On the 9th, Medina Sidonia managed to regroup his scattered fleet and took stock of the situation. The Armada was almost out of ammunition, and a strong southwesterly wind pushed it further northwards. With the English in hot pursuit, attempting a second rendezvous with Parma was not an option. The only choice was to continue sailing north, circumnavigate the British Isles, and return to the motherland. On the other hand, Lord Howard had also exhausted his shot and gunpowder. Nonetheless, he ordered his fleet to continue pursuing the enemy until the Firth of Forth on the Scottish coast. Seymour's fleet was to return to Dover and prevent any surprise attack from Parma. On August 20th, the Armada finally cleared the northern end of Scotland, entering the Atlantic. This is when its plight truly began. Tormented by spoiled supplies and violent storms, the Spanish fleet suffered a steady onslaught of losses, both in men and in vessels. In mid-September, several ships made an attempt to moor on the western coast of Ireland. Over the span of 2 weeks, the coastline claimed more victories than Howard's galleons, as 28 Spanish vessels crashed against the rocks. Surviving sailors would be later rounded up and executed by English authorities. Medina Sidonia made it back to Corunna on September 21st, followed in the ensuing weeks by what remained of his armada. A total of 44 vessels had been lost, mainly to shipwrecks on the voyage back home, including some of the finest fighting ships, and approximately 11,000 men had died, the vast majority of disease contracted during the return. By contrast, Lord Howard had not lost one single ship and only about 100 men in combat. However, his men were not spared from infectious diseases, which claimed some 3,000 casualties. Nonetheless, out of the 2 contenders, the English had clearly emerged with their naval forces still fighting fit and ready to deal a counterstrike against Spain. The occasion would come in April of 1589, when Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norris led an Anglo-Dutch expedition against Corunna, the English counter-armada. We will cover this campaign in a future episode, so make sure you have subscribed to our channel to find out if Drake and Norris were able to succeed in their mission. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.